The outskirts of Huntington, West Virginia, always carried a weary look by the end of the day, especially when the sun slipped behind the Appalachian ridge and left a faint orange glow draped over the weathered roofs of the working-class neighborhood. Ava Carver, a tiny 10-year-old with messy brown hair, walked the familiar dirt road that led home, a small wooden house tucked right up against the edge of the forest. Her mom worked the night shift at the town hospital, so Ava always came home alone. But she was used to it, used to the insects, used to the smell of pine, used to the thick cotton-like silence that fell every evening. Even though she lived in poverty and went mostly unnoticed, Ava had one habit that made anyone who knew her smile. She helped with anything she could, picking up trash others left behind, straightening a neighbor's flower pot, sharing her lunch with the stray cat at the end of the street. She didn't think of it as kindness. To Ava, it was just the most normal thing a person should do. But this afternoon was different. As she passed the edge of the woods, Ava suddenly stopped. Something was in the wind, a small, strange sound, almost swallowed by the growing darkness beneath the trees. She stood there, backpack hanging loose on one shoulder, listening. No one in town knew that in just a few minutes, this little girl would step into a story that 2,000 bikers across America would later talk about like a legend. And it all began the moment Ava turned and looked into that dim forest. Before we go on, let us know where you're following from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something special saved just for you. That afternoon, as Ava Carver walked across the damp ground covered in pine needles, a sharp metallic crash rang out, loud enough to cut through the droning insects. She froze. Out here, sometimes a buck would ram a fence, sometimes a hunter dropped a gun or a trap, but this sound was different, heavier, deeper, like something huge had just collapsed. Ava swallowed hard, clutched her backpack straps tight, then veered off the main path and pushed into the thick brush. The smell of spilled gasoline mixed with pine sap led her to a bizarre sight. A glossy black Harley-Davidson lay sideways, its front end buried deep into an old oak trunk, headlight flickering like lightning in a storm. Right beside it, a huge man hung upside down, his foot caught tight in the frame, his whole body swaying motionless like a broken doll. Blood from his forehead and hair ran downward with gravity, dripping onto his neck and dusty leather cut. On the back was a massive patch, Hell's Angels, Richmond chapter. Ava sucked in a sharp breath, heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but her feet wouldn't move. The man let out a faint groan, his eyelids fluttered, then bloodshot gray-blue eyes cracked open. His voice was rough, broken, like breath about to give out. "Hey little one, don't run, I just need help." Ava only came up to his chest even while he hung upside down, but her terror was overtaken by something stronger, the certainty that if she ran, this man would die before any adult passed this deserted stretch of road. She stepped closer, tried to push the bike, but the Harley was like a boulder. Her small hands shook, yet she tried again, shoulders straining, feet digging into the dirt. Useless. She stopped, panting, eyes darting around for an idea. Ava gathered rocks she could lift and wedged them under the frame that was crushing him so the bike wouldn't slide farther. Then she dragged over a big dry branch that had fallen nearby, jammed it into the ground like a lever, and managed to lift one corner of the bike a few inches. Not enough to free him, but enough to ease the pressure squeezing his chest with every breath. "Good job," he rasped, eyes opening and closing with gratitude. Ava pulled her mom's old phone from her bag, the one she was only allowed to carry in case of emergency, and dialed 911. The screen spun, searching for signal, then showed the words that turned her pale. No service. Cold wind from the forest whipped her hair across her face, and Ava looked up at the thick canopy. Right, she remembered her mom saying this area was blocked. Without hesitation, Ava dropped her backpack, crashed through the brush, leaves crunching underfoot, and scrambled up a hill about 100 yards away. Every step slipped in the dirt, but she kept climbing, breathing hard, heart hammering. At the top, the phone caught one flickering bar. Ava stood on a rock, raised the phone as high as she could, and finally the 911 call connected. She gasped out the location, described the situation, then bolted back to the Harley. The man was still hanging there, but his breathing was getting shorter. Ava tore the sleeve off her own shirt, gently wiped the blood running into his face, and talked to keep him awake. "What's your name? You can't fall asleep. That's dangerous." The man gave a painful half-smile. Reagan Malone. "They call me Hook Road Captain. Richmond." Ava didn't understand everything, but she kept nodding like it helped him hold on. "They're coming, mister. You have to stay awake." "I know, kid. Thanks for not running." In the cold wind and the flickering headlight, Ava kept talking, silly things about the neighbor's cat, how she liked to cook ramen, her old bicycle, anything to keep his eyes open. Ambulance sirens finally cut through the forest wind, and just minutes after Ava kept Reagan conscious, paramedics lifted the Harley off him and loaded him onto a stretcher. The little girl, face smeared with dirt, sleeve torn, still shaking, wasn't being watched by anyone, and no one told her to stay. A young nurse saw the panic in Ava's eyes and asked softly, "Want to ride with us? Where's your mom?" Ava just shook her head, so they let her climb into the passenger seat, curled up small in the corner, as the doors closed and red-blue lights spun long streaks across the Appalachian treetops. As the ambulance pulled away, the rescue crew still at the scene started shining lights around. Ava looked through the back window and saw them stop dead, crouched by the roadside. One raised a hand to call the others over. Minutes later, they found the first thing, cleanly severed brake line, cut sharp as a razor. Ava couldn't hear clearly, but saw the severed cable held up, saw the way they looked at each other. When they shone the light on the rear tire, Ava glimpsed a long slash, rubber curled back like it had been stabbed repeatedly. Before she could process it, another rescuer shouted, "Over here." He picked up a fresh pistol casing lying in the brush, metal glinting under the flashlight. Everyone went quiet in a heavy silence that even 10-year-old Ava felt meant danger. No one said the word ambush, but their eyes said it all. As the ambulance turned out of the woods, Ava heard another voice, a man who had just arrived in a local police cruiser. Tall, lean, badge reading. Officer Green. He crouched by the Harley, touched the cut brake line with a fingertip, then stared down the dark road swallowed by trees. He spoke low, but Ava caught part of it. This wasn't an accident. No way. A chill ran through Ava's shoulders. She had never seen a serious crash before, but this felt like something from a movie. She hugged her hands together, wondering, if it wasn't an accident, who made Reagan crash, and why? Inside the ambulance, the lights were dim. Reagan lay motionless on the stretcher, Evie in his arm, breathing ragged with the oxygen mask. A paramedic kept checking his blood pressure. Ava sat close to Reagan's head, watching him silently. Even unconscious, covered in blood and dirt, his face still held a strange hardness. She suddenly remembered his last words before passing out, "Thanks for not running." Without thinking, Ava scooted closer, as if afraid he'd slip back into the dark, and then in a drugged half-dream, Reagan suddenly whispered. At first Ava thought he was delirious, but she leaned in. His voice was hoarse, but each word came out tortured. "They found me, tell my brothers. They found me again." Who are they?" Ava whispered back, even though she knew he couldn't hear clearly. Reagan groaned, head jerking slightly like he was running from something in the dark. The nurse thought he was seizing and stepped over, but Ava, sitting right there, knew it wasn't a seizure. It was fear, and fear in a Hell's Angel. A huge, tattooed man wearing the heavy leather symbols of an entire brotherhood was never small. As the ambulance crossed the bridge over the Ohio River and the lights of Huntington appeared in the distance, Ava kept hearing those words echo. "They found me again." A 10-year-old couldn't understand everything they meant, but Ava understood one thing. Someone out in those woods was trying to kill Reagan Malone, and they knew exactly how to do it professionally. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Reagan Malone woke the next morning in the ER at Cabell Huntington Hospital, harsh white ceiling lights pouring down into eyes still heavy with painkillers. It took him a few seconds to realize he was no longer hanging upside down in the woods, no longer hearing metal scream or feeling his chest crushed. The strong smell of antiseptic and the steady squeak of nurses' shoes on linoleum told him he'd crossed back from the edge of death. A nurse came in to take his blood pressure. When Reagan's hoarse, broken voice spoke, "Where's the little girl?" The nurse blinked. "The little? You mean the brown-haired kid? The one who rode in the ambulance?" Reagan tried to lift his head, but the wounds pulled him back down. He nodded hard. "Yeah, the little girl. Where is she?" The nurse smiled faintly. "She's been sitting in the hallway all night. We told her to go home, but she wouldn't." The door opened softly, and Ava peeked in. Her eyes were ringed with dark circles from no sleep, but they lit up when she saw him awake. In her hands was Reagan's torn black backpack, the one rescue left at the scene, but Ava had run back to grab it before the ambulance left. "You dropped this," Ava said quietly, placing the backpack on the bed beside him. Reagan looked at the bag, then at the tiny dirt-streaked child with the torn sleeve. Something caught in his throat. He had to swallow before he could speak. Kid, his voice shook in a way rare for a road captain. You saved my life. Ava gave an embarrassed laugh, like he was joking. I just called 911. No, Reagan shook his head slowly, painfully but firmly. You didn't run. You kept me awake. You did what adults should have done. His eyes were deep and real, the eyes of someone who'd lived things the child in front of him couldn't yet imagine. I owe you one. And in my world, he paused, breathing long to make sure she heard every word. We pay our debts. Ava blinked, words heavy as iron to a biker, but far too big for a 10-year-old to grasp. She just smiled, a gentle smile that softened the whole sterile room. I just didn't want you to die. Reagan gave a quiet laugh that made him wince. That's a pretty good reason, kid. He reached out, his huge scarred, oil-stained hand, and Ava placed her tiny one in it without fear. That night, after Reagan was out of danger and moved to recovery, Ava and her mom walked home along the dark dirt road where the only streetlight had been burned out for a year and never replaced. Appalachian wind pushed the treetops back and forth like black arms brushing together, making a rustling sound that kept making Ava look over her shoulder. Her mom was exhausted after a long shift, eyes red but still forced a reassuring smile and said tomorrow would be better. But the moment they reached the porch, before their feet even touched the old mat, Ava felt someone there, a tall shadow, silent, standing in the darkness between the two porch posts like he'd been waiting a long time. The yellow light from the living room only caught the hard lines of the man's face, high cheekbones, thin lips, deep-set eyes like hollow stone. His whole body carried a cold menace. Ava had only seen in drunks or vagrants near the bus station, but this wasn't stupid drunk danger. This was deliberate. He didn't smile, didn't move, just stood with hands in the pockets of a dark jacket and spoke in a flat voice. I'm looking for the little girl, the one who saw the accident. Ava's mom instantly stepped half a step forward, shielding her daughter with the instinct of someone who'd worked ER for years. Who are you? Why are you on my porch? The man didn't answer, just tilted his head to look around her at Ava, measuring her with eyes that made the girl's scalp prickle. Then he spoke again, voice dropping low like gravel falling down a well, and Ava froze solid. It was the same voice she'd heard last night in the woods, the voice she thought was just wind, the man who vanished like a ghost before she found Reagan hanging. You were there, he said, tilting his face so the light caught a thin smile sharp as a blade. You saw the biker. You talked to him. Ava shrank behind her mom, heart pounding so hard she heard it in her ears. She remembered the shell casing, the slashed tire, the severed brake line, then Reagan's whisper, they found me again. It all snapped together like puzzle pieces. Ava didn't want to see. We already called the police, her mom said, trying to sound calm but her hand already on the doorknob, ready to shove Ava inside any second. The man gave a short, ice-cold laugh with no humor in it. Bad idea, he said, then crouched down to Ava's eye level, making her want to cry from fear but unable to look away. Listen, kid. You didn't see anything. Understand? His voice was soft but cut like a knife sliding across skin. Ava wanted to answer, wanted to scream, wanted to be brave like characters in books, but her throat locked up like an invisible hand was choking her. Her mom pushed Ava farther back and stepped fully in front, voice sharp for the first time Ava had ever heard. I said back off. The man took one more step. The porch boards creaked under his boots, and Ava saw a dangerous glint in his eyes, like he was deciding whether to kick the door in right then and there. But then he gave a thin smile, leaned back and looked at Ava over her mom's shoulder. People who help the wrong biker, he said, each word dripping like poisonous sap, disappear in these woods. Those words turned Ava's legs to jelly. The Appalachian forest was beautiful by day, but at night it was a bottomless pit. She knew people got lost in those woods and never came back, but she'd never thought someone might make that happen on purpose. Suddenly the whoop-whoop of a patrol car sounded from the main road. Red and blue lights swept through the trees and landed on their porch. The man blinked like a night predator caught in headlights. He stepped back, then another step, eyes never leaving Ava. We'll talk again, kid, he said, almost a whisper but clear as if he were right beside her ear. Soon. Then he melted into the darkness and the trees like he'd never been there, leaving only the faintest sound of footsteps. When Ava's mom slammed the door, locked it 3 times, and threw the deadbolt, her hands were still shaking. Ava leaned her forehead against her palms, breathing in gasps. What did you do, Ava? What is happening? Her mom asked. But Ava couldn't answer. She didn't dare say she'd heard the shell casing. Didn't dare say Reagan whispered about people hunting him. Didn't dare say the man who just threatened her was probably the one who tried to kill him. All she knew was a hand of darkness had reached into her life, and it wasn't letting go. Not soon. Not easily. Not while she still lived in the shadow of the Appalachian forest. That night, while Ava's mom was still trembling from the strange encounter on the porch, the little house sank into a heavy silence so thick Ava could hear every tick of the clock. They had locked every door, drawn every curtain, turned off most lights, but fear still stood just outside the woods, staring in. Near midnight, just as Ava started to drift off, the ground trembled faintly, like something enormous was approaching from far away. Then a familiar yet impossible sound rolled through the small town on the edge of the Appalachians, the deep, steady roar of engines like thunder rolling across the ground. Ava's mom sat bolt upright first, listening hard. "Lord, don't tell me they're drag racing on the highway again at night," she muttered, throwing on a robe and going to the window. But the sound wasn't drag racing. It had rhythm structure like an army on the move. Ava ran to her mom's side. When her mom pulled the curtain aside, headlights poured into the house like 100 eyes staring in. Her mom whispered in panic, "No, it can't be." Ava was more curious than scared. She went to the front door, unlocked it and opened it just a crack and froze. In front of their house, mere yards away, 40 Harley-Davidsons were lined up perfectly along the dirt road, headlights blazing, engines idling low like the steady breathing of steel beasts. Every bike carried the same glowing red patch under the lights. Hell's Angels, Richmond chapter. Ava's mom grabbed her arm to pull her back and slammed the door, but Ava saw something that stopped her in the middle of the line. Two bikers were pushing a wheelchair, and in it sat Reagan Malone, still bandaged, still pale, but awake and staring straight at their house like he had promised himself he would show up here again. Ava opened the door wider despite her mom's fear. She stepped out onto the porch into the white glare of dozens of headlights. The bikers removed their helmets almost in perfect unison, a sight both uniform and solemn, and every pair of eyes turned to Ava, the tiny child standing in the shadow of her trembling mother behind her. Reagan raised a hand. The two bikers wheeled him right up to the porch steps. Even badly injured, he sat as straight as a road captain should. His voice was weak but clear. "This is her." An older silver-bearded biker behind him nodded, as if confirming it to the whole world. Reagan looked at Ava for a long time, then spoke. "She saved one of us." He swept his hand toward the long row of rumbling Harleys. "And we protect ours." Ava's mom stepped down one stair, voice shaking but no longer angry, only bewildered. "Why? Why are so many of you here?" A massive biker with shoulders like brick walls stepped forward a little. "Ma'am, your daughter kept our brother alive. That makes her family. And families show up." Those words, spoken in a heavy East Coast drawl, hit Ava harder than the engine noise. Her eyes went wide, heart racing with both fear and something overwhelming, unable to understand why something she did on instinct had brought this impossible scene. Reagan leaned forward a little, trying to meet Ava's eyes. "Kid, from now on you're under our wing." A younger biker, face covered in tattoos, stepped up and placed a small patch the size of a palm into Ava's hand. White background, black letters, "Little Guardian." Ava looked at the patch, then at them, and for the first time in that long, terrifying day, she no longer felt the Appalachian darkness closing in on her, but a wall of steel, leather, and gratitude from men the whole town always called dangerous. But Ava saw clearly they hadn't come to hurt anyone. They had come because of Reagan's word, and because of her. As soon as the engines quieted, the 40 bikers spread into a wide arc across Ava's small front yard, forming a silent half-circle that looked like a courtroom made of leather and steel. The yellow porch light mixed with the white glare from the Harleys, shining on scarred faces and the grave seriousness of men who had weathered every storm life could throw. Reagan Malone raised a hand for silence, then nodded toward Ava's mom to invite a few of them inside. The mother, still stunned by the sight she'd never imagined, opened the door wider, an instinctive gesture from someone who understood something huge had just begun. Ava sat on the worn-out sofa, tiny feet dangling above the floor, clutching the Little Guardian patch like it might disappear. Reagan was helped in by two bikers and settled into the armchair across from her, breathing hard but with eyes sharper than any time since she'd met him. "All right," he said, voice low and rough. "She deserves the truth." A few bikers nodded. Others crossed their arms by the windows, instinctively watching every direction. Reagan looked straight at Ava, not the heavy adult-to-child look, but the look of someone speaking to the only person who had kept him alive. "Kid," he started, "what happened last night wasn't an accident. And if you hadn't shown up when you did, we wouldn't be talking right now." Ava swallowed hard and sat up straighter. Reagan took a deep breath, gripping the wheelchair arms to steady the pain shooting through his ribs. "We," he said, tapping the Hells Angels patch on his chest, "have been tracking an illegal drug ring running out of eastern Kentucky, spreading through West Virginia, and Ohio. No name, no colors, no presence on any map, but they're powerful, ruthless, and very rich." A biker behind him added, "They don't like outsiders touching their market, especially bikers." Reagan continued, "We have reason to believe this ring isn't just moving drugs. They're trafficking people, laundering money, and tied to at least 4 disappearances in the last 2 years." Ava's eyes went wide. She had thought Reagan just slid off the road. Now the pieces from Elk Creek Trail, slashed tires, severed brake line, shell casing, snapped into place like a cold blade laid across her lap. Reagan lowered his head, voice dropping. "Last week we got a tip they were using Elk Creek Trail itself to move small loads across state lines. No one notices because everyone avoids that stretch." He looked at Ava. "Last night I went to check it out. Alone. I shouldn't have." An older biker, silver beard, arms covered in ink, snorted. "Road captains never ride solo, but Hook's stubborn." Reagan shot him an annoyed glance, then went on. "I got ambushed near the oak where you found me. Heard footsteps before I saw flashlights. They fired a warning shot first. The casing rescue picked up was theirs." "They?" Ava's mom asked, voice shaking. Reagan nodded. "At least 3 of them. They cut my brake line earlier, slashed the rear tire so the bike would lose control, then waited for me to hit the low spot. I tried to brake and got thrown into the tree. I didn't die instantly by some kind of miracle." Then he sighed, not from pain, but from what came next. "In my backpack," he pointed to the bag Ava had carried back, "is everything we've collected on them. Routes, drop locations, faces of a few of their guys, and a map of their stash houses. That stuff is worth more than any biker's life." Ava stared at the backpack, stomach twisting. She had touched it last night without knowing it held the reason Reagan was almost murdered. "You brought it home," Ava whispered, voice small as wind on water. Reagan gave a soft, worried laugh mixed with gratitude. "Yeah, kid. You carried it home not knowing you were carrying a bomb." A younger biker muttered, "If the Kentucky crew finds out where the documents are." Another cut in, voice heavy, "They'll come. And this time they won't miss." Ava's hands went ice cold. She remembered the man on the porch. He had asked the exact right question. "He came to the house," Ava said quietly. "The man tonight. He said, people who help the wrong biker disappear." The air in the room changed instantly, like all the oxygen had been sucked out. Reagan gripped the wheelchair arm, froze for a few seconds, then turned to the others. "That's them." Silverbeard nodded hard. "They know Hook's alive, know he made it to Huntington. And now, they know the kid's involved." Ava's mom gasped and pulled her daughter close like a shield against a storm that hadn't arrived yet. Reagan looked at Ava for a long time, eyes both gentle and heavy with duty. "Kid, last night you saved me. But you also accidentally saved my whole chapter, and maybe people we haven't been able to protect yet." He sighed, eyes glowing like hot coals. "You're not just little guardian because you were kind. You became our most important witness." Ava felt her chest swell with a strange mix of fear and courage. She didn't understand all the terms, didn't know how bad the Kentucky ring really was, but she understood one thing. She was now at the center of something bigger than the entire Appalachian forest. Reagan spoke the final line, low like distant thunder. "And now we're going to protect you, just like you protected me." The moment Reagan finished, all 40 bikers shifted into motion like a silent military unit. No orders, no show of command. Yet every man spread out across the property as if they'd done this their whole lives, because they had. Out front the Harleys kept idling in perfect rhythm, a low, deep wall of sound that would make anyone think twice before approaching. Ava stood on the porch watching them pitch tents, string lines, start fires, set up portable lights, and assign watch rotations. A thick-bearded biker set a big water cooler beside the porch and spoke to Ava's mom with surprising politeness. "Ma'am, we're standing guard. Nobody gets in here without our say-so." Ava's mom didn't know how to respond. Fear still raw, but in the middle of an Appalachian night full of darkness, Having 40 huge men protecting her house felt safer than anything she'd ever known. Word of the Hells Angels' presence spread down the dirt road faster than wind through the pines. Neighbors cracked doors, peeked out, then slammed them shut. Windows lit up in scattered hill houses. Worried whispers mixed with barking dogs and the sounds of the Appalachian night. Less than 10 minutes later, the first police cruiser showed up, lights flashing but no siren. 2 officers stepped out, hands near their guns by reflex. But when they saw the line of Harleys and 40 pairs of eyes staring back, they stopped at the edge of the light. One officer called out, trying to sound calm, "Evening. We got a report of a large gathering." Reagan sat in his wheelchair on the porch, 2 bikers standing behind him like walls. He tilted his head, voice low and even. "Nothing illegal going on, officer. We're on public ground, not blocking the road, not causing trouble, not breaking any laws." The officer looked around. True enough. No drinking, no fighting, everyone just standing there scary but orderly. "All right," the officer said, clearly unsure what to do next. "Just keep it civil." Reagan gave a smile so thin it was almost invisible. "Always do." The cops backed up, got in their car, and left dust swirling under the headlights. Ava watched and felt something warm inside. She had never seen anyone make the police back down with nothing but silence. But as the night wore on, the mood in the biker camp shifted from orderly to tense. People spoke less, moved softer. A few bikers stood at the tree line, eyes locked on the forest. Ava felt like the whole Appalachia was holding its breath. Near midnight, when she brought Reagan a glass of water, she noticed his eyes weren't on her. They were fixed on the trees behind her. Ava turned. At first she thought it was just shadows. Then she saw it. A very slight movement between 2 big oaks. A figure, standing perfectly still, watching. Goosebumps exploded across her skin. "Reagan," she whispered. He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the dark spot. "Yeah, I see him." Ava sucked in air. "Is it them?" Reagan didn't answer right away, just signaled 2 nearby bikers. They instantly shifted, one moving toward the woods, the other circling behind the house like they'd drilled this 1,000 times. Reagan turned to Ava, voice low but firm. "Kid, go inside. Lock the door." But now, his words weren't loud, but they cut like a knife. Ava ran inside. Her mom locked the door the second she saw her daughter's face, but Ava pressed her face to the small window beside the door, watching the camp in the firelight and headlight glow. The bikers who had seemed loud earlier now moved like ghosts. Some held small flashlights, others just stood still, hands resting lightly on chains or knife handles. What made Ava's breath catch wasn't the number of guards. It was that the figure in the woods never moved, never retreated, just watched. Like it was counting bikers, looking for weaknesses, waiting. Every time the campfire threw light into the trees, Ava caught a metallic glint, maybe a jacket button, maybe a watch face, maybe worse, the barrel of a gun. Then the figure was gone. Not running, not hiding, just melted into the trees like it had never been there. Reagan and the others stood still a few more seconds, scanning the forest. A younger biker muttered, "They're scouting us." Reagan answered, "Of course they are. That's what they do." He looked toward the house where Ava's eyes still peeked through the curtain and gave a small hand signal, a reminder she was not alone, no matter how thick the Appalachian darkness got. When Ava turned back inside, heart still racing, she knew one thing. Tonight her house wasn't just a house anymore. It had become the front line. And the Hells Angels, men the whole town feared, were forming a circle of protection around her, against something far worse, an enemy that hid its face, knew how to wait, and never gave up. The shadows in the woods had found them, but this time Ava was not alone. She had an army of steel, leather, and loyalty, and they were drawing the battle line right in front of her door. The next morning, when Appalachian sunlight cut through the canopy and woke the bikers still dozing against their bikes, Ava couldn't shake the feeling that eyes from the forest had been on her back all night. She stood behind the curtain, watching them eat breakfast, black coffee and stale bread, every pair of eyes red from no sleep. Reagan sat in his wheelchair near the porch, quietly talking with the guards who had watched the tree line. Even though he tried to look calm, Ava could feel the worry behind the toughness. She couldn't stand just sitting and waiting for something worse to happen, especially knowing she was holding the key to everything. While her mom washed dishes and the bikers were deep in discussion, Ava quietly slipped out the back door, slid through the narrow strip beside the house, and headed straight into the woods. She knew she shouldn't, but curiosity and responsibility were stronger than fear. The morning Elk Creek trail smelled of damp earth and pine needles, but Ava stayed alert. Every bird call, every twig snap underfoot made her freeze and listen. She followed the spot where she'd seen the figure watching. When she reached the big oak, she crouched, and her heart slammed. Clear boot prints in the soft dirt. Men's size, tactical soles, not hiking boots or work boots, but the kind used by ex-military or shadow organizations. The prints led deeper into the woods. Ava swallowed hard and followed. A few minutes later, she saw overturned rocks, broken branches in the direction someone had walked. Then something that stopped her cold. A small clearing between two mossy boulders, like a temporary camp. Remnants of an extinguished fire, smoke still clinging to the leaves, and most important, a black plastic box half hidden under dry leaves. Ava held her breath, knelt, and pulled the box out with shaking hands. Inside were roughly folded papers, a few photos printed from a phone, a small radio for comms, and a sheet of numbers she didn't understand. But what scared her most was a large hand-drawn map and marker covering the Louisville, Kentucky area. Arrows and red circles everywhere, focused on one building labeled Rally Point, PA Gathering. Ava didn't know exactly what it was, but she recognized the Hells Angels logo next to the words. She opened more papers. One read, Phase 1, Disable Scouts, Intercept Hook. Another, Phase 2, Move in during gathering, Eliminate leaders. Then another, Brothers from Ohio arriving at dawn. Ava covered her mouth to keep from making a sound. This wasn't just about finding Reagan, this was a large-scale attack, an organized massacre. Her hands shook violently as she held the radio. Next to the power button was taped a tiny note. Channel 11, Night Ops. Ava didn't understand everything, but she understood one thing clearly. This was something the people in the woods never wanted found, especially not by a 10-year-old girl. And if they knew she had found it, they would come back. Not just for Reagan, for her mom too. Fear wrapped tight around her chest, but she forced herself to stand. She folded the map, stuffed it and the papers inside her jacket, closed the box, and set it back exactly as it was but with the lid slightly ajar, so it looked untouched. Then Ava ran. Not panicked child running, but silent, choosing paths that left the fewest prints, even jumping over soft dirt patches so she wouldn't be tracked. When she got close to the house, she saw two bikers on patrol. One turned, squinted. "Kid, where've you been so early?" Ava was breathing hard, but forced herself calm. "I need to talk to Reagan." The two bikers exchanged looks, then led her inside. Reagan was talking with three others when he turned and saw Ava, face pale, eyes huge, hands clutching something under her jacket. He knew instantly something was wrong. "Kid," Reagan asked, voice turning serious. Ava didn't speak. She just pulled the map and stack of papers from her jacket and laid them on Reagan's lap. The room went dead silent. Reagan unfolded the map, looked for a few seconds, his already sharp eyes going dark as cold steel. "Where did you get this?" he asked, through clenched teeth. Ava told everything, in broken breaths. The footprints, the temporary camp, the radio, the papers about attack phases. When she mentioned the red circle around the Louisville location, a younger biker swore out loud. Silverbeard picked up the Phase 2 sheet, face turning gray. "This is a coordinated hit," he said. "An attack on our biggest rally of the year, the day 1,000 bikers will be in Louisville." Reagan tapped the map, voice dropping like thunder. "This isn't small-time drug runners. This is an organization. They want to wipe out Hells Angels leadership across 3 states. He pointed to the biggest red circle. "And they wanted to start with me, Hook. Prep work from Whiskey Ridge to Huntington." The younger biker shook with anger. "And this kid," Reagan looked at Ava, eyes heavy but proud. "This kid just stopped an attack that could have killed hundreds of us." A biker by the door growled. "Without her, we'd have been hit in the middle of Louisville, with no warning." Silverbeard put a huge shovel-sized but surprisingly warm hand on Ava's shoulder. "Kid, you didn't just save Hook. You saved all your brothers." Ava looked up at them, eyes still scared but deep inside knowing what she had just done changed everything. Reagan nodded with real respect, the kind bikers don't give easily. "Little Guardian," he said, voice low but full of pride, "you just became the most important piece in this war." For several minutes after Reagan declared the truth about the Louisville plot, no one in Ava's small house spoke. The room sank into the kind of heavy silence that only comes when people face a decision big enough to change an entire organization, or history. Then Reagan braced both hands on the wheelchair arms. drew a deep breath like he was gathering every ounce of strength left. He looked at Ava one last time, eyes both warm and fierce, as if he needed the little girl to understand that what was about to happen wasn't about war or revenge, but because her kindness had accidentally saved hundreds of lives. "Bring me the radio," Reagan said. A younger biker ran and brought the black emergency radio, the kind only used when a chapter needed every brother within hundreds of miles. It was heavy, old, edges scratched, but a symbol of the power bikers carried like an oath. Reagan flipped open the front cover, hands slightly shaking but eyes steady. He turned the dial to the emergency frequency, the one only activated when a chapter faced a life or death threat. The whole room went dead quiet. Even the wind outside seemed to stop. Reagan pressed the button. The radio crackled with static like the breath of a sleeping beast being woken. Then he spoke, hoarse, deep, slow but ringing like a steel bell against the Appalachian stone. "Brothers, this is Hook, emergency frequency." No answer at first, just static like electronic rain. Reagan continued. "Little girl saved my life, and she just saved all of us again." Ava stood by the door, heart pounding as she heard herself mentioned on the radio of the huge men surrounding her house. Reagan glanced at her and added, each word heavy as iron, "Kentucky organization planning a coordinated hit on Louisville gathering. Phase 1 stopped. Documents found. We need full support. Repeat, full support." Silence again. The whole house, the whole yard full of Harleys held its breath. 2 seconds. 3. 4. On the 5th second, as if every biker in 3 states pressed their mics at once, the radio exploded with voices. Dozens of male voices poured through the speaker, overlapping, deep, rough, powerful, all saying the same thing. "Copy that." Then another Richmond chapter en route, a southern drawl, "Lexington brothers moving now." An Ohio voice, "We ride at dawn." And then a distant Harley engine roared through the speaker, followed by the growl of dozens more. A biker in the room laughed softly, full of pride. "They're coming." Reagan set the radio on the table like dropping a stone into still water. The ripples started instantly. Bikers inside stood taller. Those outside straightened their cuts, checked chains, checked lights. No orders given. Yet everyone turned into an army preparing for something bigger than any fight they'd ever had. All through that night, engines roared in waves as one group after another arrived. But that sound was only the warning of the real storm coming at dawn. When the first Appalachian sunrise broke, the earliest light cut over the eastern ridge like a blade slicing the night in half, and then the ground began to shake. Not the gentle tremor of the 40 bikes from the night before. This was the tremor of hundreds of tons of metal moving at once. Ava was in the kitchen with her mom when the water glass on the table started rattling. Her mom panicked, thinking small earthquake, but Ava knew. She ran to the front door and threw it open. In front of her, from the far end of the misty dirt road, was a solid black line moving toward them like a giant snake. But as it got closer, Ava saw clearly the biggest convoy of Harleys she would ever see in her life. It stretched to the bottom of the hill, row after row like an ancient tribe on pilgrimage. 2,000 Harleys, all lights on, all engines roaring, all riding straight to her house. The sound was no longer motorcycles. It was an earthquake, deep bass that made the house windows vibrate. The entire town of Huntington practically froze. Neighbors opened doors and stood with mouths open. Some stood in the road shielding their eyes from the sun, not believing what they saw. An old man shouted, "I haven't seen anything like this since '86. A young mother holding her baby whispered, "Lord, what is happening?" But Ava heard none of it. The world had shrunk to 2 things, the roar of Harleys and the wind blowing through her hair. As the convoy neared, they slowed, fanning out in layers around the dirt road to her house. Headlights turned, forming a ring of light around the property. No one spoke. No need. Ava stood there, a little girl who barely reached the chests of the men on bikes weighing nearly 600 pounds each, but she felt no fear. None at all. In the roar of engines, they all cut off at once, like someone flipped a secret switch. In the sudden silence, Ava heard footsteps from the center of the formation. Then Reagan appeared, pushed forward in his wheelchair, 2 bikers clearing the way. He looked at Ava not as someone who had been saved, but as someone looking at the person who had saved an entire army. "Kid," Reagan said, voice not loud but carrying through the absolute quiet. "You called them without saying a word." Ava opened her mouth but no sound came. Silverbeard stepped forward and boomed, "Brothers, this is the little guardian." 2,000 bikers raised fists, helmets, or placed hands over their patches in perfect unison. To a biker, that gesture is the highest respect possible. Ava felt her knees buckle. She had never been called special, never thought she would stand in front of a sea of men whose single nod could shake the Appalachians. But what moved her wasn't the power, it was the truth. Every single one of them had come to protect her, a poor little girl living on the edge of the Huntington woods, simply because she had done the right thing in a moment of danger. Reagan looked up at the sky and declared, like taking an oath, "She saved one, she saved all. Now we ride for her." The moment the 2,000 bikers' roar of "for her" still echoed through the Appalachian Valley, another sound suddenly tore across the air. High-speed pickup and SUV engines screaming in from the direction of Elk Creek Trail. Reagan frowned, gripping his wheelchair arms tight. "They're coming," he said. No one needed to answer. The bikers at the edge of the road instantly turned, eyes locked on the dirt path leading out of the woods. Ava stood near the porch, feeling the atmosphere shift in a heartbeat. Every biker straightened, shoulders squared, gazes turning to blades in the early morning sun. A young biker from the eastern watchpost came running, out of breath. 3 trucks coming fast. No plates, same guys from last night. Engines roared louder, then 3 vehicles burst from the tree line like wild animals, dust exploding upward, headlights blazing as if trying to pierce the biker formation. They only made it a few dozen yards before they realized what any sneak predator would feel in their bones. 2,000 bikers had already formed 2 solid walls of steel across the road, sealing every escape. The Harleys were lined up layer upon layer, perfectly even, like a military blockade. The Kentucky crew slammed on the brakes, tires skidding long trails in the dirt. Doors flew open, several men jumped out, weapons ready, faces tense. But they didn't advance. They didn't dare. They couldn't. Because surrounding them was an ocean of men, an army of leather, steel, and stairs no criminal ever wants to meet. Ava held her breath. She had never seen human beings literally become a wall. One alone could be scary, but together 2,000 bikers were an unbreakable wave of steel. Huntington police arrived late, red and blue lights sweeping the scene, but no one stepped forward. The chief stood beside his cruiser, looked at the biker formation, then at the 3 Kentucky trucks. He raised the bullhorn, then lowered it again. A younger officer whispered, "Sir, what now?" The chief answered without taking his eyes off the sight, "We don't interfere, not today." The bikers didn't raise a fist. No one drew a weapon. They simply stood there silent, motionless, their presence a colossal shield. Reagan was wheeled to the front of the line. Sunlight hit the bandage on his head, making him look like a man who had just walked out of battle, yet still carried a commander's aura. He looked up at the men on the trucks and spoke, voice carrying without a megaphone. "We know who you are. We know what you planned." Ava saw every Kentucky man swallow hard at the sound of Reagan's voice, not because of the words, but because behind him 2,000 bikers stood perfectly still, eyes locked on them, waiting for a signal. Reagan continued, "This little girl stopped your operation, and now you're standing in front of 2,000 riders who know exactly what you tried to do." A big guy from the Kentucky side snapped back, "We're not afraid of." He never finished. An Ohio biker took half a step forward, just half a step. No threat spoken, no aggressive move, but the silence of the hundreds behind him choked the words right out of the man's throat. Reagan leaned forward in his wheelchair. "You can try to finish what you started," he said, slow and cold as metal, "or you can leave Huntington right now." A gust of wind blew through. It created a vacuum of silence. Then from deep in the biker ranks, Silverbeard spoke, calm but carrying, "We're not here to fight, but we don't run, and we don't let our own get touched." The entire Appalachian range seemed to hear it. A Lexington biker stepped up. One word, "Choose." The Kentucky crew looked around, panic clear in their eyes. One took half a step back. Another glanced at his partners. All 3 trucks suddenly looked tiny under the shadow of 2,000 bikers in silent defensive stance. Then, as if reaching the same conclusion at the exact same second, their leader signaled the others back into the vehicles. No words, no argument, no looking back. They scrambled in so fast they bumped into each other. When the 3 pickups spun around, tires spitting gravel and kicking up blinding dust, the entire biker formation watched without blinking. And when they disappeared into the woods, not retreating, but fleeing, Reagan finally leaned back in his chair and let out a long breath, like releasing the weight from his chest. Not a single punch thrown, not a single shot fired, not a single injury. But Ava understood perfectly. She had just witnessed a confrontation where the power of unity defeated violence without ever needing violence. 2,000 bikers didn't have to lift a finger, they only had to be there. There for Reagan, there for the chapter, and there for her, little guardian. The Appalachian wind blew gently again, but this time, instead of carrying threat like the night before, it carried a blanket of safety. Ava squeezed Reagan's hand. He smiled, closed his eyes, and silently thanked the heavens for what had just happened. After the 3 Kentucky trucks vanished into the woods like shadows fleeing the sun, the air in front of Ava's house lightened, as if someone had lifted a boulder off the town's chest that no one knew they were carrying. The 2,000 bikers, after standing like a wall of steel, slowly relaxed and began moving again, no longer strung like bowstrings. But instead of mounting up and leaving, they all turned toward the little old wooden house where Ava stood beside Reagan, and what shone in their eyes was not fatigue or anger, but gratitude. Gratitude so deep a 10-year-old couldn't fully comprehend it, yet she felt it in the way her whole body trembled. Silverbeard stepped forward first, hands on hips, looking up at the roof that was rotting in places. "If we're gonna protect her, her house can't look like it'll fall on her," he declared, as if stating the obvious. An Ohio biker laughed. "Man's right. Storm season's coming." A Lexington biker pointed at the roof. "That spot leaks. I saw it this morning." Ava stared in confusion. Why were 2,000 huge men examining her house like a construction project? But Reagan understood. He nodded slightly, eyes lighting up like late afternoon sun through the leaves. "All right," he said, voice firm as an order. "Brothers, let's fix what needs fixing." And then the miracle began. No foreman, no blueprints, no plan. 2,000 bikers spread around the house like a giant construction crew. 6 men dragged ladders out and climbed the roof, hammering down new shingles pulled from 3 supply trucks they'd brought. Others carried fresh lumber, measured the porch, replaced the rotted window frames. Ava had grown so used to she never noticed how bad they were. A crew cleaned the yard, pulling weeds, gathering broken bricks, fixing the fence that had been down since last year's windstorm. A young, fully tattooed biker knelt to tie Ava's shoe and grinned. "We're making this place safer, little guardian." Another pair hauled over 2 brand new cans of paint. "Pick a color, kid." 3 Richmond bikers sawed boards for a new roof section, the scream of the saw ringing through the air like festival music. Ava could only stand and watch, heart so full it felt ready to burst. Her mom stood in the doorway, hand over her mouth, not from fear, but from tears she couldn't hold back. She had believed no one in this town cared about the 2 of them. Now an entire army was proving the opposite. A huge biker walked up and handed Ava's mom a thick envelope. "We all pitched in. This is a 1-year fund for her education. Use it however you need." Ava's mom opened it with shaking hands, bill after bill after bill, real money she had never dared dream of. "Why?" she choked out. The biker answered with a respectful nod. "Because your daughter saved a brother, and then she saved all of us." When Ava's mom turned to look at her daughter, Ava just smiled, as if she still didn't grasp how big this was. But the miracles didn't stop there. Another group pulled a gleaming silver SUV right up to the porch. Perfect, like it just rolled off the showroom floor. An Ohio biker held out the keys to Ava's mom. "Ma'am, we know you work night shifts and long shifts at the hospital. Your car, well, it's not safe anymore." Ava's mom shook her head over and over. "No, I can't accept this. It's too." The biker closed her fingers around the keys. "It's not a gift, it's a thank you." All 2,000 bikers nodded as one, turning those words into something impossible to refuse. Ava felt tears sting her eyes. But the final miracle, the smallest yet heaviest, was when she saw a crew installing security cameras all around the yard, along the fence, on the roof, and even facing the forest path. "These woods won't scare you anymore," one biker said, adjusting a camera angle and handing Ava a tiny remote. "If anything strange shows up, you'll know." Only when he finished did Ava realize they weren't just fixing the house, they weren't just giving her safety, they weren't just giving her mom a lighter future, they were giving back the peace the night in the woods had stolen from her. When the last shingle was nailed, the fence stood straight, the yard was swept clean, the cameras were up, the windows gleamed, and the new SUV sat in front of the porch. Ava stood in the circle of bikers, feeling the Appalachian wind blow differently now. No smell of fear, no shadows, only laughter, hammer strikes, the soft idle of engines, and the knowledge that some debts in this world aren't paid with money, only with gratitude and honor. Reagan looked at Ava from his wheelchair, eyes shining with a pride she had never seen from any adult. "Kid," he said, "you fixed us first. We're just fixing the world around you." And in that moment Ava's Nolly magic was real. And sometimes it starts with a little girl who wanders into the woods and decides to save a man hanging upside down on a Harley. As the Appalachian sun sank behind the trees, golden-orange dusk spread over the little wooden house that now looked completely different from a few hours ago. Clean, solid, warmer, as if it had always been built to protect Ava and her mom. The last bikers were packing up tools, laughter mixing with the fading sound of drills, leaving behind an unfamiliar peace in the air. Ava stood on the freshly repaired porch, still clutching the little guardian patch, brown hair messy in the breeze. Reagan signaled two younger bikers to wheel him close. He wore his familiar leather cut, wounds carefully bandaged, but his eyes held the soft steel Ava had first seen the day she saved him. "Kid," Reagan called, voice low but warm, as if he had rehearsed this line in his heart since before dawn. Ava walked over, small feet stepping on the newly cleaned ground, dark eyes shining with curiosity. Reagan opened the canvas bag on his lap and pulled out something Ava never expected. A miniature leather vest, real leather, cut perfectly to fit her. On the back stitched in bright red thread against black, "Little Guardian, Honorary Hell's Angel." Every conversation around them fell silent the moment Reagan held it up. Bikers scattered across the yard, turned, stopped everything, as if this ritual was not only important, but more sacred than any oath they had ever sworn. Ava's mom covered her mouth, eyes brimming, not from fear but from emotion that stole her words. Reagan leaned toward Ava, voice carrying through the late afternoon. "We don't give this to outsiders, ever, but you." He paused, looking at the little girl with pride and gratitude. "You're not an outsider, you're family, our family." A biker from the back boomed like a drum, "Little Guardian," and suddenly the entire camp, more than 2,000 voices echoed as one "Little Guardian." The shout shook the valley, bounced off the mountains around Huntington, making Ava tremble because she couldn't believe it was for her. Reagan motioned her closer. He slipped the vest over her shoulders and fastened the side buckles like draping her in armor of honor. "This," he said, hand resting on the patch on her back, "isn't just leather, it's a promise. Wherever you go, whoever you become, you will never walk alone." Ava looked down at the vest, tiny fingers touching the letters. She felt its weight, not the leather, but the trust of a community she never thought would open its doors to her. A young biker stepped up and smiled at her. "Kids like you don't come often. You reminded all of us what we're supposed to stand for." Another added, "You brought out the best in us, kid. In this world, that's rare." Ava just smiled, the pure, shy smile of a child who had become a legend without understanding it yet. But the change wasn't only among the bikers. When the timid neighbors who had been terrified of the Hells Angels the night before quietly stepped out to their gates, their eyes no longer held fear or suspicion. Instead, they looked at Ava with admiration. A middle-aged man said softly, "That kid did what this whole town forgot, believe in kindness." An old hunched woman nodded. "She reminded us that sometimes we judge good people wrong just because of the jacket they wear." And then the strangest thing happened. The huge bikers the town had always feared now gave each neighbor a respectful nod. No campaign, no explanations, no defense, but through Ava, the whole community saw what they had never seen before. The honor of a brotherhood they had misunderstood. Reagan looked at the little girl for a long time, eyes softer than anyone had ever seen on a road captain. "Kid, you changed more than you think." Ava shrugged. "I just did the right thing." Reagan laughed, eyes both sad and beautiful. "Yeah, and that's why it changed everything." When the sun finally set, the last light caught Ava's new vest, making Little Guardian glow like red fire in the dark. All the bikers fired up their engines, but this time not with war roar, softly, solemnly, like a blessing for the little girl who had become their heart. Ava stood there in the leather vest too big for a child, but perfectly sized for her spirit, and understood that from now on her life was tied to another family, one made of steel, wind, and oaths of honor that 1,000 men would keep for her forever. Little Guardian, the legend she never knew she was becoming. Appalachian dusk fell slowly, brushing amber across the town of Huntington, like one last coat of gold before handing the night to the mountains. Long rays from the setting sun poured over the rows of Harleys, making every piece of chrome and every curve glow like burnished copper. Ava stood on the newly repaired porch, the little guardian vest draped over her tiny shoulders, the smell of fresh leather mixing with the warm pine of late afternoon. A gentle wind lifted her brown hair, as if trying to carry the pride of the 2,000 men starting their bikes in front of her. One last young biker closed a truck bed and raised a hand in salute, smiling kindly under his scruffy beard. Another placed a hand over his patch and dipped his head like greeting a young leader. And then, when they were all ready, the engines began to rise in rhythm, low, deep, steady, like the shared heartbeat of a tribe forged in steel. Reagan was wheeled to the front, his chair stopping right in front of Ava. Even with wounds still forcing him to sit slightly crooked, his eyes burned with the look Ava would carry for the rest of her life. Gratitude, pride, the unspoken brotherhood bikers only show when it comes from the soul. He braced his hands on the wheelchair arms and leaned toward her. "Kid," he called, and Ava stepped close, her small hand resting on his scarred one. The wind carried the growing thunder of engines behind him, but Reagan's voice cut through it all, clear as a bronze bell in the valley. "You reminded us who we are, and we won't forget." Ava smiled. Not the smile of a child being praised, but the smile of someone who knows what she did truly mattered. She hadn't saved anyone for a reward. She hadn't run into the woods expecting an army to follow. She had simply done the right thing, and that small act had touched the hearts of men the whole town once feared. When Reagan tipped his head in salute, a biker behind him raised a hand high, time to ride. Engines suddenly surged as one, so powerful the ground shook beneath Ava's feet. The Harleys began to roll, first the front two rows, then the rest in perfect rhythm, like an army that had rehearsed this moment their entire lives. The impossible column stretched from Ava's door, down the dirt road, around the bend, and on forever like a steel dragon waking up. Ava ran to the edge of the yard, standing on a rise overlooking the main road. Her little vest flapped in the wind, and in her eyes reflected the sky turning copper red. 2,000 bikers rode out of Huntington in a line so long Ava couldn't see the end. They passed golden fields, past small houses where townspeople stood on the roadside waving, across the bridge over the Ohio River now glowing purple in the dusk. A child standing beside his mother on a street corner whispered, "Mom, who are they?" The mother answered, eyes fixed on the endless line, "Those are men keeping a promise." When the bikers rode through stretches bathed in sunset, every bike lit up like moving sparks, like 2,000 pieces of the sun leaving Appalachia to return to their roads. Ava heard the engines blend into a strange, majestic song, not loud, not angry, but powerful, like the heartbeat of this journey itself, beating its final notes before fading. Reagan turned one last time from his wheelchair being pushed slowly at the rear of the formation. He raised 2 fingers to his forehead in salute, a simple goodbye, heavier than 1,000 thank yous. Ava answered by lifting her miniature vest high, the leather flashing in the sunset like her own promise. She remembered them. She would always remember. And they, through 2,000 engines still thundering, answered that promise, the biker way, by showing up. The column kept flowing, a river of steel winding along the darkening mountains. When the last bikers disappeared into the trees, only a faint golden dust cloud remained in the evening light. Ava stood there a long while, fingers gently clutching her vest, letting her small heart beat in rhythm with the aftershock of the wave she herself had created. A wave of kindness, a wave that had awakened the honor of a brotherhood stretching across states. And as the soft wind brushed her ear, Ava thought she heard a whisper, whether the wind or the engines still echoing on the horizon. A single act of kindness can move an entire army. And that day in Huntington, it became true. If you love emotional stories like this, hit subscribe right now so you don't miss the next one. And please leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your like is the biggest motivation for me to keep telling these special stories.